The movie opens up with a guy named Callum Aldrich, who is in the middle of his cleaning shift at an office. During this, he receives a call from an unknown person who blackmails him into coming to a specified location within 15 minutes, or else he'll leak Callum's private screenshots to his friends and family. And Callum's been screenshotting naked dogs. Feeling helpless, Callum rushes to the said location, only to stumble upon a crash site where the driver is lying on the ground, while the passenger appears helpless inside the vehicle. Overwhelmed with panic, Callum calls 911 to report the situation. Moments later, the driver, who is pretending to be dead, suddenly wakes up and incapacitates Callum from behind before abducting him. This sounds like a job for the sexiest man alive. The following morning, the police arrive at the scene, with Chief Inspector John Luther leading the case. Luther's colleague, Martin, briefs him that the passenger in the car is Sari Jones, who disappeared 7 years ago. After scrutinizing the crime scene details, Luther deduces that Callum wasn't just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, but someone had intended to abduct him. He then reaches out to Callum's mother, Corinne, and promises to find her son. Luther has seen at least 100 people die. He probably shouldn't have promised that. Amidst the bystanders, there's a man named David Roby, seemingly concerned by Luther's involvement in the case. He is revealed to be the culprit behind the abductions. Knowing that Luther will be a huge obstacle in his plan, David and his absurd haircut dig up dirt on the various illegal acts Luther has committed as a police officer, aiming to wipe him off the case. A few days later, Luther is dragged into court, facing a multitude of charges, including intimidation of suspects, evidence of tampering, and bribery. As a consequence of these unlawful deeds, he is imprisoned in Hawksmoor Maximum Security Prison. This news excites David, as he can now proceed with his plans without any interference, and it was so much easier than it should have been. David turns out to be a wealthy trader and serial killer who blackmails people for their dark secrets. In the prison, the inmates hate Luther, as several of them are incarcerated because of him. Hence, they often form alliances and beat him up. The movie then cuts to a few years later. One day, Corinne receives a call in which she hears her son crying. She tries to talk to him, but before that, she has provided a location to meet him. Without thinking twice, Corinne drives to the location, which is an empty house. Upon entering, she calls out for her son, and soon comes across a horrifying scene. Lifeless bodies suspended from the ceiling, including Callum's. Soon, parents of other victims also arrive, and it appears that everything has been planned. Just then, the room is set on fire, during which Corinne spots a masked man staring at her from the window. She then runs away in the nick of time, but unfortunately, the other parents are not so lucky. The next day, police arrive at the scene, and DCI Odette Rain is now leading the case. After a swift examination of the house, Rain holds a meeting with her team and outlines that the earliest murder dates back 11 years, with the most recent being from the previous year. She speculates that the acts were carefully planned and carried out over an extended period of time, so there'll be a lot of data to parse. She then assigns the team to find out a commonality between all the murders, which will take them closer to the killer. Meanwhile, within the confines of the prison, Luther receives an envelope that has written 65.8 on it. He understands it to be a radio frequency, because what the hell else would it be? And upon tuning in, here's a recording of Callum's anguished voice, recorded just before his death. The recording also features the voice of David, who admits that he is the one to put him in jail, and challenges Luther to stop him if he can. Afterwards, Corinne visits Luther in jail and berates him for not finding her son's killer. Luther tries to talk to her, but she isn't ready to listen. After a brief conversation, Corinne leaves, and as she gets into a car, we learn that David is the one who brought her there. He is pretending to console her in every way he can. Had they become friends? I don't know, who cares? Later on, Luther uses his hidden cell phone to inform Rain of the broadcast, but she refuses to accept any help from a criminal. In addition, she directs her subordinate, Archie, to get Luther's phone confiscated. Left with no other options, Luther contacts his former colleague Dennis to help him break out of the prison, but before they can delve further into the plan, the prison officers confiscate his phone. Later, Luther also liaises with the prison guards to get himself transferred to another prison with lower level security. The guards refuse, saying that they can't change the system. Hearing this, Luther devises a plan to have the inmates attack him, which will ultimately result in the system relocating him. Not sure how that works, or why he waited 2 years to do it, but let's just watch him punch some large men. That same night, one of the prisoners attempts to commit the unthinkable, attracting the attention of the control room officers. They somehow manage to save the prisoner, but out of the blue, he knocks them out and escapes with the key. Was the guy faking it? Were the police officers in on it? What the hell is going on? The prisoner then unlocks all the cells, initiating chaos. Following this, many inmates gang up on Luther and dish out a brutal punishment on him. When the guards see this, they eventually decide to transfer him, just as he planned. Later, Luther is being driven to another prison when a black van intervenes. It's Dennis and his men who incapacitate the officers and rescue Luther from captivity. They then drop him off at a garage, and Luther pays them for their work. Now that he's freed from confinement, Luther vows to capture the serial killer. On the other hand, Rain learns about Luther's escape, so she summons the retired officer Martin for help, since no one knows Luther better than him. Martin agrees to help and goes to the prison to check Luther's belongings. He finds the radio frequency and deduces that Luther's location can be traced by tracking the frequency back to its source. Meanwhile, Luther arrives at the site of the broadcast and meets a tattoo artist named Derek. He demands to know who used his radio frequency, but Derek and his absurd haircut are initially hesitant hesitant to divulge any information. However, after a little intimidation, Derek confesses that he was blackmailed by a man for some of his private videos. According to Derek, he received the transmitter through a courier and was instructed to leave it running for 24 hours before ditching it somewhere. Derek also provides Luther with a cell phone through which the blackmailer contacts him. With this information, Luther grabs the cell phone and leaves just before the police arrive. Elsewhere, we see a group of David's workers who are keeping an eye on people from all over the world. They have seemingly hacked into phones, cameras, tablets, and home security cameras, enabling them to spy on people. In this way, David retrieves their confidential activities, which he gets a bunch of secretaries to punch into Excel spreadsheets, and then he exploits for blackmail, compelling them to carry out his bidding. In the next scene, Luther contacts Martin, seeking help in tracing a phone number. The latter reluctantly agrees and informs him of the location of Piccadilly Circus. After this, Martin also relays the information to Rain, who then deploys armed police SCO-19 to apprehend Luther and the serial killer. Upon arriving at the location, Luther dials the number from Derek's cell phone, and David, who happens to be there, receives it. This allows Luther to spot him. Trapped and left with no options, David immediately grabs a kid from the crowd and holds him at knife point. With a sinister smile, he declares that,
"This is just the beginning, precious."
actually, it's about the halfway point, Smeagol. The next second, several of his blackmailed victims begin jumping off from a nearby building, one after another, creating chaos. David seizes this as the perfect opportunity and runs towards the subway. Luther pursues him, but he is also chased by the police officers. At one point, Luther catches up to David, which results in a physical altercation between them. Our hero eventually gains the upper hand, pinning David down, but the fight is soon interrupted